Welcome to Fraud Friday. I'm Bob Coleman, and today we're talking about straw borrowers. Frank Eversman, 74 years old, former bank president, according to the Department of Justice, has pled guilty to loan fraud. He was in cahoots with his brother-in-law, Greg Crawford. Greg Crawford was a real estate developer, and over a course of 10 years, according to the feds, well, now we can say definitely, because the two have pled guilty to loan fraud of using straw borrowers. So I want to talk about that a little bit. What is a straw borrower? A straw borrower is someone who buys property on behalf of someone else and hides the identity of the true owner. The reason why this is important in this situation is, on the bank's books, Greg Crawford, therefore, was not an owner of these properties, did not control these properties, but there was someone who was a nominee substitute as owner. And what Greg did is he would go to these people, and the feds say these people didn't qualify for the loan. There were issues in terms of low credit scores and income availability, documentation to make the payments on the loan. They were hiding the truth. The concept is simple. The regulators are tasked with making sure banks have good assets on their banks. What are the assets? Are loans. And if the loans are risky enough, the bank will fail because they don't have enough capital to support those assets. So if you have $100 million in assets and those are golden loans, then that's fine. But if there's a deterioration in the credit portfolio, then the bank could be at risk. This is a complicated situation in that the bank didn't lose a dime. And what the feds alleged is the lying to the regulators and the lying of the bank president on official forms. In other words, if you personally lie to a bank in your application, overstating your income or overstating the value of the asset, that's a crime. If you are a bank official and you lie about the quality of the asset to the examiners, that also is a lie. And the reason why is the entire system of our banking system is we need to assume that the regulators are saying these assets are of value. And so the feds were alleging, well, because we were using straw borrowers, we didn't know who owned these properties, which is Greg Crawford. Now, why would you have a straw borrower? It doesn't say, but it could have exceeded the bank's legal limit, or I can speculate that because the feds walked in 2020 and were asking about these loans, that they were trying to reduce the risk to this real estate developer. Real estate developers can be a very nice source of business for a lender because of the fees they're willing to pay. They're willing to pay exorbitant, higher than market rates in order to get the transaction done because the cost of capital is simply a cost of doing business. So let's review exactly what happened. Eversman is the president. He steered the fraudulent loan applications through the bank. Crawford then went out and got the straw purchasers. He orchestrated the falsified paperwork. And there were two other important parts about the fraud. He misrepresented the purpose of the loan. And what he said was, hey, we're going to renovate these properties to up the value of the appraiser. Now, the bank orders an appraisal of a house that's easy to determine based on the comps in the area. And if you have a house that's under construction or is being renovated, then the appraiser can say, okay, based on this, I'm going to value the property based on the completion of the construction proceeds. In this case, that didn't happen. Crawford represented they were going to do renovations, and that didn't happen. Commercial property is different than residential property. Commercial property is simply valued on the income stream of that property. And if you have a restaurant and they're paying you X amount of dollars, then that determines what the value of the property is, not the square footage. So what Crawford was saying, hey, I'm going to renovate this property, and he also then I can get a higher lease agreement. Well, the lease agreements were fraudulent, and he never did the renovations. The feds don't say what Crawford did with the money, but we do know the loans were all repaid. We do know that money was paid for property taxes and insurance proceeds. So we know that occurred. So it seems like a technical violation of the law, but the feds are saying our entire system and credibility of our banking system is based on trust. And if you're misrepresenting who the borrowers are, even though in this case everything was fine, that you're opening up a house of cards that can collapse the entire system. And over the course of the years, we can see what happened during the Great Recession when many, many banks went out of business because of overvaluation of the assets. The intentional representations where borrowers' incomes was misrepresented, and also then we did not have the renovations to increase the values of the property. 30 loans were done, totaling $3.6 million. In the plea agreement, the feds, the two sides couldn't come together on the sentencing. The feds want what they call offense level 22, which translates to about four years in prison. And they're saying because the loss is $3.6 million based upon that argument that the risk to the institution was grave enough that it could have collapsed the institution. The defense attorney said, no. We think based on the defendant's age, 74, that we're looking at 0 to 6 months. What's interesting in this plea agreement is the two sides did not agree to that number, and they submitted it to the judge, and the judge will decide on what will happen. So the takeaways on this is the reason why straw borrowers are frowned upon or illegal is because then we cannot have a true risk assessment of that institution. People are lying to federal officials, and that's what the crime is. I hope you've enjoyed this technical detail in the weeds definition of what the crime was, but the bottom line is the bank president and the brother-in-law have pled guilty to bank fraud. They pled guilty to the one count, and they will be sentenced, I believe, is October. Thank you for joining me very much for Fraud Friday. Talk to you next week.